welcome to another episode of the Brown and Black podcast. My name is Jack Rico.
And I'm Mike Sargent.
And every week we take a look at race and pop culture through a brown and black lens.
All these MAGA looking people in there. And I thought, you've got a lot of fucking nerve coming in here. Coming into this Mexican restaurant. I don't think you should be able to enjoy anything but Cracker Barrel. Quit watching NBA basketball. Quit watching sports that are dominated by African Americans. Quit going to Mexican restaurants. You want white culture? You go fucking live in it. You live in it, bathe in it, go to do all the white culture stuff, get your Bible thump on. White people that triple Trump should be banned, boycotted from enjoying the best thing that America has to offer, which is multiculturalism. Get your fat asses out of the Mexican restaurant, get your fat asses over to Cracker Barrel, because nobody wants to see your fucking smug ass, teeny weeny, pink arm, big gut around. Nobody wants to see that shit.
Mike, I applaud Jennifer Welch. She's the former Bravo star and co-host of I've Had It. And that totally sounded like an I've had it moment that she had with white people. We spoke to someone that enlightened us about exactly what this rant is all about. And I think that's why we're doing this podcast. Because when I heard this clip, I knew exactly what the academic terminology was. And it's called white voyeurism. It is when a white person comes in and visits another culture and then goes without any of the ramifications of living that culture's pain, plight, anything. They don't earn it. They're just visiting. It's like you go to Epcot, man, at Disney. And you know how you go to all the 7 countries and so forth? Hey, I'm in Mexico, and it's all Mexican.
Yep.
It's fun, but you can't do that in real life, and they think they can. And nowhere else in the world do you see that more than here. So I had that layer of depth, Mike, that I recognized immediately.
I've seen her before and I follow her. And so I've gotten these clips and this is what she does. So there are 2 things that work here for me. Yes, I absolutely thought of white voyeurism because that is literally what it is. And that is the academic term. But I also thought of who she is. Like what kind of white person says this shit? There's that for me. And because of, it's not, she doesn't just say it. She means it. It's in her butt.
Dude, she says it with disgust,
with
Mike.
Utter disgust. Okay. So that's a very specific thing to be that like enraged about what people of quote unquote your race are doing.
What it is to me, like the first thing that hit me was, come on, man. We know what this is.
Yes, we do.
This is white hypocrisy. This is white cultural hypocrisy. And it's something that we as brown and black people have to live with. That you want us some of the time, but not the whole time. You like us as basketball players, but not as the husbands of your daughters.
It's consuming black or non-white culture without valuing the people who create it. It's attraction without any solidarity.
Exactly. And Mike, no one better that I know has been able to elucidate and explain this better than Dr. Barnor Hesse. Why he is important to this conversation is because this man created the framework called the 8 White Identities that deconstructs not only the white voyeurism story that went viral with Jennifer Welch, because that's what it is, but 7 other identities, Mike, that no one really talks about or knows.
Just for context for our audience, Dr. Barnor Hesse is an associate professor at Northwestern University. He teaches African American studies, political science, and sociology. So he's a social scientist. And a few years back, that framework, the 8 White Identities, it went viral. And it went viral because this Manhattan public school shared it with parents, asking them to reflect on their own whiteness. And the chart, it goes from white supremacist to white abolitionist. And it was really meant as an educational tool, but it set off a firestorm with right-wing media, so much so that the International Sociological Association had to put out a letter in defense of him because they were trying to revoke all his scholarships and the fact that he was here and doing what he was doing. That's how deep it went, just from him giving a framework to look at white people. So there's something he said that really struck me and really stuck with me.
It becomes a shock to the system in which the last 500 years has involved white academics and legislators and political elites documenting, researching, analyzing non-white populations. In fact, there's an academic discipline called anthropology. Anthropology in university departments is predicated on research into non-white populations. It would be staggering if somebody said, I wanted to research a white population. And if that person was African or Asian or so on, it would be staggering. Why would it be staggering? Because it's challenging existing power relations. So I think that's part of what was unsettling. This idea that white people are not simply normal people, but they do have activities that can be studied and analyzed as white identities.
I never forgot that. I never forgot that. And it's one of those things where you knew it, but you never really put it together. You know what I mean?
Because you're not supposed to, Mike. It's the default. God doesn't ask himself, am I God?
That's right. And everybody else knows too. There's 2 reasons why I think that this went viral. 3 reasons, really. One is that, wow, she just goes there. 2, that she's calling white people out on something. She's calling them out. She's saying, you do this fucked up shit. What the fuck is wrong with you? And this other thing, like, but we never get called out. You don't judge us. She never even used the word prejudice or racism. She never used that word in there once. She didn't have to, because it's just something that's so baked in. You don't even, you know how white people react if you call them racist. The 3rd reason it went viral is because white people are not used to not only being called out, but being identified as something. When do you question white identity? You never do. And you never ask brown or black people what they think. So hearing this from a white woman, there's more power in what she said than anything a brown or black person could say about white people, because they're not even going to listen.
Mike, the only way racism is ever going to be demolished is if white people do what Jennifer Welch is doing. It's the only way.
Absolutely.
And Dr. Hesse has said it. So what you're about to hear next is the 8 white identities as explained by the creator himself. Here is our exclusive episode of the 8 white identities with Dr. Barnor Hesse.
So this idea of identity needs to be distinguished from people. So this is not a typology of people. This is a list of identities that people can take up, or people become positioned in relation to. You can take up an American identity in lots of different ways. You can take up a Christian identity in lots of different ways, and so on. You can take up a white identity in lots of different ways. And I point out 8 different ways that have existed historically and one can see sociologically. The first one, white supremacy, shouldn't be too difficult to understand. And in fact, let me back up a little bit. I should say, of course, that the US invents white identity, okay? And it legalizes the idea of white identity in 1790 when it introduces the first naturalization law. And in that naturalization law, it says that only white people can be citizens. So without a white identity, you cannot be a citizen under the 1790 naturalization law. When you get to the Civil War, one of the things we notice in the Civil War is that the conflict is between two different kinds of white identity. A white identity that's defending slavery and a white identity that's against slavery. I haven't invented white identity, nor have I invented more than one white identity. That's historically there. So what do you do as an academic? You begin to analyze these developments and you ask yourself the question, is it simply two white identities? We know there were a white identity that was for civil rights for African Americans, and we know there was a white identity that was against civil rights for African Americans. Well, from the 1960s onwards, it seems to me that this has expanded into more nuanced, different kinds of white identity. So we always will have white supremacy. This is the identity that sees itself as dominant and masterful and as representing everything else in the nation. So if you think about something like democracy and citizenship, and you think about citizens in relation to democracy, the most powerful and supreme citizens in the US are white citizens. Because even now, only white citizens can decide if and when structural racism will ever be tackled. If white citizens came together and said, we want to tackle structural racism, it gets done. No other citizen composition has that power. So that tells you something about what white supremacy looks like in relation to citizenship. That hasn't changed in over 300, 400 years. White citizens abolished slavery, set up Reconstruction, set up Jim Crow, abolished Jim Crow, and it's all done at the level of who has mastery. And also remember, it was white citizens that gave Black citizens citizenship. Who giveth can also taketh away. So white identity, number one, is white supremacy. White voyeurism is the kind of white identity that breaks with this notion that I want to be completely segregated from Black people culturally, because it's deeply invested in knowing and understanding and finding pleasure in and viewing Black culture. And you see this kind of white identity clearly in the history of Black music in the US, from blues to jazz to rock and roll to hip hop, right? You see a lot of investment in Black music and identifying with Black people culturally and musically, but not identifying necessarily with Black people socially and politically. It's voyeuristic because we're looking at Black people from afar in terms of their physical, human dispositions, but we're keeping them close as pleasurable objects of consumption. White privilege as an identity is, the identity that is not completely invested in the overall dominance of supremacy, but assumes that the world consists of white people and non-white people. And that's basically how you see the world. And you see the world from that point of view. It assumes that the values and the histories of white people are the standard, are the norm. And in that context, you can have diversity. You can have people who are involved in the norms set by white people. You can have people who are involved in the institutions that are organized and defined by white people. White benefit. This is the kind of identity that tends to consider speaking out against injustices or recognizing aspects of racism, but doesn't really want to do so because it benefits from how things are. So this is where you might have police officers or athletes who could speak out against injustice that they see, but choose not to because their careers are deeply sedimented in the structures that are upholding some of these injustices. They benefit from it. The white confessional identity. This is, again, there's a kind of recognition of injustice and inequalities, not quite sure about whether we want to do something about this, but we want to display our solidarity with Black people, with Latinos, with Asians. And often we find ourselves, and you see corporations doing this a lot, apologizing for things that have happened. We will never do this again. We didn't realize that our advertising had these racially charged implications. There's an attempt to change things, not necessarily following through, but making some impact, not necessarily making a great impact, but keeping, Black people, minorities, Asian people on side. The white critical, as we're moving now closer to the challenging of racism, describe those individuals and organizations that begin to see a critique of the society, and they signal their critical disposition and attitude by avoiding terms like, watered down terms like prejudice and bias. And they start making use of terms like racism and structural racism and white supremacy and institutional racism. And you see this a lot amongst artists and writers and filmmakers. I give, for example, Ken Burns, the documentary filmmaker. You would see him in this white critical field. You could also place Damon Lindelof, the writer and creator of The Watchmen HBO series, beginning to have a more critical attitude to the cultural formation of the US. Now, the last two white identity categories is where a lot of controversy emerges. So number 7 is white traitor. I must emphasize, I did not invent that term. That's been in the literature since the 1990s, when a lot of early sort of critical white studies literature emerged. And the idea of the white traitor was really about identifying those white identities taken up by people in institutions and organizations when they can see that their colleagues have been witness to or have perpetrated some kind of racial injustice, and they refuse to close ranks with those people. They break ranks. It's a little bit like having a juror on the grand jury, and the grand jury consists only of white jurors, and they see improprieties and inappropriate behavior, and they decide to speak out and not simply say, I'm going to fold myself into my white community. You are a traitor to injustice. You are a traitor to concealing inequality. And that's what that means. And then the white abolitionist is really, it comes from the long history of abolition against slavery. If you were to really place it in that lineage, then you would recognize that the white people who are involved in abolitionism with Black people were a very different kind of identity formation, or taking up a very different kind of identity than the white citizens who wanted to preserve slavery. So abolition was really about, how do we dismantle and get rid of the system that sustains slavery? The problem with abolition in the past was that it seemed that there was always an assumption that if you get rid of slavery, you'll get rid of the system of race. But that's not what happened. The system of race remained, slavery was abolished, and race morphed into white supremacy, institutionalized and legalized, and institutional racism. So this idea of white abolitionism is about abolishing white institutions that rest on the authority of structural racism and white supremacy.
And hopefully Dr. Barnor Hesse was able to fully explain the complexities of white behavior towards brown and Black people. And we hope not only is this able to help you identify what she is, Jennifer Welch, but why it went so viral, because she's identifying some white behavior but also classifying it to those who do not get classified.
And you can check out our original full episode with Dr. Barnor Hesse in our podcast archive or on YouTube. Also, check out our upcoming Substack newsletter coming out later this week. We'll see you on the next episode
of Brown and Black.